Okay, put that on the screen. There we go. All right, hi everybody. Why don't we get started? Let's learn in the zechut of our chayalim. Hashem should watch over them. May there be no more casualties. Amen. Let's get the right page. Okay, we're on page 443. And last week we did a piece from Kierkegaard, completely off the beaten track, as you recall. But we were talking about Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's view, and apparently Kierkegaard's as well, that there is a very strong dividing line between a prophet and a philosopher. A philosopher may have a lot of eloquence in expressing his views, but he doesn't come with the authority of Hashem, nor has he experienced a face-to-face revelatory experience, which is what the prophet has. And so because the basis of our entire faith is prophecy and not philosophy, we come with a lot more A, confidence, and also B, a lot more sense of authority. Just going to mute everybody because I'm getting some ambient noise. And feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to say something at some point later. Okay, so we continue on that line of taking the Khazar king, is because the Kuzari is a dialogue. So the Khazar king is now going to come to the defense of the philosophers. He says, what do you mean that the philosophers are inferior to the faith that the Jewish people follow? The Kuzari said, I see that you disparage the philosophers. This is large paragraph 18 in essay 4. I see that you disparage the philosophers and attribute to them the opposite of what they are famous for. Yet, when we see someone become reclusive and ascetic, we say that he has become a philosopher or that he has followed the path of the philosophers. You, on the other hand, deny them any good quality. You're saying they're no good, that there's no benefit in trying to follow the philosophical path. Follow the Jewish path, not follow the philosophical path, which is completely inferior. But what about all the people in the world who have taken up philosophy and have improved their lives and have improved their behavior and have removed themselves from the indulgences of this world and feel that there is great benefit to that? What about the people in the Himalayas? What about the ascetics who become hermits and monks and live lives of purity and prayer and contemplation and meditation? What's wrong with that? Sheldon, go home. Remember that joke? Sheldon, go home. Yeah. Okay, so Rachel, I hope everyone knows what Rachel was referring to. Okay, I won't say over the joke. It's an old joke. Okay, so, okay. Well, there's for Victor's sake, I'll tell you the story. There's an old Jewish woman who gets on a boat to the Himalayas, travels by boat, by sea, by air, and finally makes it after weeks and weeks of travel in this harsh weather conditions, finally gets to the top of the Himalayas, and she sees the old what would you call him? It's the old hermit, the old guru, the great wise man that everyone has come to visit. And she says to him, I have just one question. Sheldon, when are you coming home? Okay, so that's all right. Okay, so the rabbi said, I am not disparaging their deeds. What I explained earlier was the essence of their belief, that man's exclusive objective for success is the pursuit of knowledge. Remember, that's the word philosophy, philosophia. Philo, a love, Sophia is knowledge. So that's what philosophy is. That's really the word itself defines what the entire objective from the philosopher's view is the purpose of existence. Purpose of existence is the attainment of knowledge. That one should strive to comprehend all that exists using potential intellect, which will then transform into actual intellect, which in turn will become an ennobled intellect resembling the active intellect. Now, that's very confusing terminology. There seems to be three stages of growth of a human being, and what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is describing is a very technical and time-specific belief within the and geographic-specific belief within the philosophical community. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is in the early 12th century. He is coming from a specific philosophical milieu, which is Islamic in southern Spain. And so when we read a text like that, our goal, of course, is to apply it to make it a more universal message. But here in particular, it's a very particularistic definition of what the pursuit of knowledge is all about. If we were speaking in the 20th century, the 21st century, we would say a philosopher believes in veritas, like the slogan at Harvard, and every university has some Latin slogan of the pursuit of knowledge reigns supreme, and that's the way we would describe it. What Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is describing, however, is actually a metaphysical process that was the prevailing belief among Islamic philosophers during his age. What he's describing, and I've spoken about this before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. There's an entity called the active intellect in the medieval Islamic world. The active intellect is something that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had made reference to at the very beginning of the book. And just to go through it very quickly, it goes something like this. In Aristotelian philosophy, there's always a dichotomy. There's always two sides to a coin. There's the affector and the affected, the male and the female, the matter, the form and the matter. In other words, there's constantly something that receives and something that gives, that comes from a higher place. And there's a constant chain of emanation, starting with the prime cause, the prime mover. Those are the two terms that Aristotle used, that we would call God, okay? That creates the first emanation, and then there's a series of celestial bodies that continue this emanation constantly, the lower celestial body receiving from the higher celestial body, and then passing along to the body just beneath it, until you get to our terrestrial realm, where all of terrestrial existence receives some kind of influence from the heaven above. When we go even further into this idea, we know that for Aristotle, everything that exists is dichotomous in that it's broken down into form and matter. Form is the shape, the way that it's constructed, and the matter is the stuff that makes it up. So if I have a wooden chair, it's made up of the form of a chair and the material of the wood. That's how Aristotle viewed the entire world. And form comes from a higher source and passes over to formless matter, its form. Human beings are no different in this chain of causality. Human beings receive knowledge, and then they transmit knowledge in turn to things that are lesser than them. So if I am a carpenter, then you might say that I received the idea of a chair from some higher source, and it's in my mind. And then I can transfer that thought of that form of a chair into a formless piece of wood by chiseling out and screwing together and constructing a chair. So I've passed on from my higher place, my form, over to the lower construct, which is the chair. Where did I receive the idea of a chair? I got it from some higher source. Now, Aristotle talks about this idea of some kind of disembodied intellect that exists above the terrestrial realm. And it's where all of mankind get their eureka moments. Whenever we have this aha, where did this idea come from? It came from a higher source of intellect. And that is what the medieval Islamic philosophers called the active intellect. What is man's goal in life? Now that we've explained this chain of causality, what is man's goal in life? Man's goal is to, instead of being the affected, to rise to where he can reach the level of being an affector without being dependent upon anything in his material world. So, for example, there's two types of carpenters. One is the carpenter who sees a chair and is able to replicate it. That's a low-level carpenter, because where did he get the idea for making a chair from? By looking at something from the material realm and getting the idea of transferring the form of chair A into a chair that he's going to make. But a truly ennobled and actualized carpenter can actually come up with an idea of a chair that has never existed, that he's never seen before, because he receives it from a higher source. And so that's that's sort of like what, if we were to describe this in philosophical terms, you want to go from a person who learns about existence from the material world to go to a higher level where your knowledge becomes no longer dependent upon material, but rather becomes completely detached from the material realm, and you become one with the active intellect. And that's, for the philosopher, the key to immortality. I wrote a paper a number of years ago when I was in school just to describe the three-pronged process from Al-Farabi, from Muhammad Al-Farabi, which is the source of what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is describing. I'm just going to share it I'm just going to read one paragraph from it. Go ahead, Victor. Oh, that's what we discussed last week. That was last week's discussion. Okay.
So that the prophet any analytical reasoning as well as synthetic.
So Victor's asking, does a prophet use analytical thought? And again, we went through the difference between Maimonides and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and their different views of what a prophet is. For Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, it's a completely non-intellectual endeavor, the prophetic experience. The Rambam has a completely different view and feels that it is the ultimate intellectual experience. Very, very different worldviews. But we can speak later because that's what we covered in the past. So let's take a look at Al-Farabi. I hope you can see this. Let me just make sure let me make it a little bit bigger. Okay. Al-Farabi in his works Al-Madina Al-Fadila and Al-Siyasa Al-Madiniyya was of the opinion that the human intellect goes through three stages of development. Three stages of development. The first stage is the material or passive intellect. When man's mind has acquired sensory data from the world around him, the active intellect acts like light onto color from our analogy above and helps to translate the sensory data into basic principles of knowledge. Man is then considered to possess the second level of actual intellect. Now, what that means is that, like, I've looked at the chair and I've gone from having a passive intellect which has no knowledge of chairs. Now I have knowledge of chairs. So I've gone from never having known about the idea of a form of a chair, and now I possess the form of the chair in my mind. So I have actual intellect. The individual must then exert himself to develop his intellect further by building on this foundation of basic knowledge by acquiring and integrating more knowledge on his own, independent of the material realm that was within his purview. Once the individual has developed his intellect to the point that he has attained all intelligible thoughts, his intellect reaches the third level of acquired intellect, what I translated over here was ennobled intellect. At this point, the active intellect serves another purpose, which is to integrate itself completely with the human intellect, such that the active intellect becomes the form to the acquired intellect's matter, and there's a complete attachment to the active intellect. And that, for the philosopher, is the key to immortality. Because when I die, what remains of me after I die? For the philosopher, it's my thoughts. And the only way that my thoughts can live immortally is if they are completely detached from the material realm. If my thoughts are dependent upon material, on matter, then I can't live eternally, because my thoughts, without seeing things, can't possibly be immortal. But if I die and my thoughts are independent of the material realm, so then I become immortal through that attachment to the active intellect. Anyway, that's the brief explanation of what's going on here. And this intellect remains forever. This level can be achieved only by devoting one's whole life to study and constant thought. One cannot do this while concurrently dealing with worldly affairs. The philosophers therefore deem it proper to divest themselves of money, status, pleasure, and children, so that these things will not distract them from knowledge, right? We all know that children sap our brains dry, right? And deprive us of any intellect. So that's what he's saying. You have to live. If you're going to really follow this philosophical pursuit, you have to divest yourself of all material things so that you can focus on independent thought that is removed from the physical realm. They further believe that once one has achieved the desired objective of wisdom from his pursuit of knowledge, it makes no difference what he does after that. They do not fear God because they do not believe that there is any recompense for heeding him. They do not believe that if they would rob or murder, they would be punished. They only extol good deeds and admonish against bad deeds because it is considered the proper and praiseworthy path of conduct, but only because by doing so one resembles the Creator who organizes everything based on a system of goodness. They establish modes of conduct based on their intellect, which are not obligatory upon them, but can be adhered to when the need arises. Torah is not that way, except for its customs. It has always already been explained using Torah wisdom what is in the realm of custom and therefore subject to condition practice and what is not. And that's, there are things that are contained in the Torah which are optional, but the vast majority of the commandments of the Torah are obligatory, are mandatory. We have to live our lives a certain way, not that it's left to the whim of the person of intellect who can design for himself a certain regimen of behavior that will help him attain a greater level of intellect. So that, in a nutshell, is the difference between the philosopher and the Jew. And that all goes back to the very, very beginning of the book, which is really, this is why this section of the book is really it's like a recurring idea throughout the Kuzari. Well, how did we start this book? It started with a king of the Khazars having a dream. And in the dream, the angel tells him, your intentions are desirable to the Creator, but not your deeds. Your intentions are desirable, but not your deeds. So what does this impel the king to do? He seeks out a philosopher. Maybe the philosopher can tell me how I'm supposed to live my life. And at the very beginning of the book, he calls a philosopher in. What does the philosopher tell him? It doesn't matter what mode of behavior. Pursue knowledge. And whatever mode of behavior will help you pursue knowledge better, that's what you should do. Does it matter whether, you mix the milchiks and the fleishiks? Does it matter, what specific things you do? No, because we don't believe in a God who is scrutinizing every single human behavior. We believe in a very transcendent God who is responsible for all of existence, but really doesn't care about what's going on in human affairs. Our God is much too high and much too removed from the material realm to really even know what's going on down here. But your goal should be to attach yourself to that divine intellect. And you can only do so through the active intellect by divesting yourself of the physical realm. And that's the reason why you see people acting with asceticism, because they want to get there. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right path. Because if you believe that there's more to life than the pursuit of knowledge, that there's a goal to indulge in God's world so that you can use the materials of this world that God gave us in order to serve Hashem, then you're living your life with much greater purpose than the person who removes themselves from this world and does not partake of the world that Hashem wants us to partake. You can certainly appreciate how this view of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi became sort of the favored view of many who followed the school of Kabbalah and who followed the school of Hasidus throughout Jewish history. The Kuzari became their hero because of these ideas. The Kuzari is a lot of people's hero. I just want to make sure you understand Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is cited by a number of different camps. He's cited by the Kabbalistic camp because he's known as a proto-Kabbalist in describing the world in terms of some transcendence existing within our material realm. He also is embraced by the Hasidim because he's the counter-intellectual. He doesn't believe that you need to perfect your intellect in order to attach yourself to Hashem, which was what the whole Hasidic movement was about. It was a counter-intellectual movement, that they felt that the Litvische way of living, that your life, which was purely for the pursuit of knowledge, was missing the mark, and it had lost its joyfulness and its zest for life by making Judaism an austere religion of intellect. And he's also the hero of religious Zionists because of his great designation of importance to Zion, to the land of Israel. So he's got a lot of fans, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. But in this particular instance, you see how he takes a decidedly negative view of those who feel that the purpose of life is to pursue intellect. Okay? Yes.
You know, so everything is like you're gonna use it. Like I use a car, you can use a knife for different purposes.
So Victor is arguing that you can use the intellect in order to serve God. It's just a vehicle, it's a means, of course. And I think Rabbi Yehuda Halevi would agree to that. He would say, of course, you have to use your intellect to make sure that whatever you're doing has intellectual satisfaction. But it's not, but intellect as a vehicle or as a means to something greater, not as an end unto itself, which is the difference between the philosopher and the prophet of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Karen asks the question, so according to this paradigm, an artist in whatever form would be very high up on this hierarchy. Yes. So that's possible. Karen, why don't you clarify what you mean? You can unmute yourself. What are you trying to get across?
Well, you haven't used the word creative, but it seems to be that a creative intellect is something that you create the form, so therefore, or it's given to you by God, either way, however you want to look at it. But that's something higher than just manufacturing a chair, even if you would get a form from somewhere else. Right?
I see what you're saying. Right. So if you're in the philosophical realm, right, yes, the philosopher would say that attaining knowledge from a higher source outside of your purview of material perception, of sensory perception, is a much higher form of attainment of knowledge than by just imitating what you see around you. Correct. Right. So if you're an artist, well, I mean, so that's really, you have to really, I guess, crystallize the definition of the word artist. Some people might consider themselves to be artists, even if they just imitate other people's art. That's also an artist of some kind, right? But the artiste, right? The higher level of art is the person who innovates, like a Picasso, right? Mm-hmm. who created a whole new genre of art. Okay, I'm not an art expert, so I don't remember all the different eras that art has gone through. But
Impressionism,
yeah,
classicism.
the Impressionism and the classical, right? Right. So the people who innovate, the innovative people, the ones who aren't imitative, are getting their ideas based on this model from some higher source that is not already within their purview of experience. And that's the higher form for the philosophy. Absolutely correct. Okay, so this is where we're going to hold it for today in the Kuzari. And we'll therefore understand why a celebration of our physical lives is very important for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, because he does very much feel that God wants us to use the creation in which he implanted us to serve him, not to reject it, but rather to use it constructively. Okay, for the next discussion, let's go into Parshat VaEra, and the name of our Devar Torah for today is dealing with cognitive dissonance. And I'm going to share my screen for you, if I can. Let me. Here we go. Okay, you should have it up on your screen in just a moment. There's a lot to talk about when we talk about the language that appears in Parshat VaEra regarding the plagues, and regarding the hardening of Paro's heart. I do want to point out a very interesting contrast in language, and I want to suggest that this contrast in language is quite deliberate. We're going to read about 7 plagues in our Parsha. 7 out of 10 appear in Parshas VaEra. We probably know the plagues by heart, but what I'm going to present you with is 2 classifications of 3, and 1, the last plague of the Parsha, which is unique, and you'll see that in just a second. When it came to the plagues of blood, lice, and boils, the Torah describes Paro's stubbornness, his obstinacy, as Vayechezak Leiv Paro. And you can see that in the psukim. When we learn about the plague of blood, it says that the Lo Yachlu Mitzrayim Lishtot Mayim Min HaYoor, Vayihi Hadam B'chol Eretz Mitzrayim, that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. The blood was throughout the land of Egypt. But then it says, Vayasu Chen Chartumei Mitzrayim Bilatehem, that the Egyptians were able to do the same thing with their incantations. Vayechezak leiv Paro v'lo shama alehem kasher diber Hashem. And Paro's heart was made chazak. How would you translate chazak? Strong. It became, his heart was strengthened. Okay? And he did not listen. Okay. So even though we translate it normally as his heart was hardened, really that's not the most accurate way of translating the Hebrew. Really, chazak means it becomes strong. His heart became strong. Okay. The second is by the lice, which is the 3rd plague. It says, "Vatihi akinam ba'adamu va'behema." The lice permeated man and beast. Vayamru achartumim el paro etzba elokim hi. The magician said to Paro, "It's the finger of God." This one they couldn't even replicate, but nonetheless, Vayechezak leiv Paro v'lo shama alehem, that Paro's heart was made strong once again, and he didn't listen, just as Hashem had said. Number 3 is the plague of boils, which is plague number 6. If I'm not, did I count it right? Dam tzvardei akinim arov dever shchin. Yeah, plague number 6. So there was v'lo yachlu achartumim lamod lifnei Moshe mipnei hashchin, that the magicians couldn't even stand before Moshe because they too were afflicted with boils. And Vayichazek Hashem et Lev Paro. God here is hardening Paro's heart. Not just that Paro's heart became hardened, but that God actively hardens or strengthens Paro's heart, and he did not listen to them. Okay? Now, you know that for the first 5 plagues, it says that his heart became hard. And in the last 5 plagues, it says that God hardened his heart. We know that the commentaries point out that it was only the last 5 plagues where Paro needed reinforcement from God to be stubborn. But that's not going to be our focus for today. We're going to do a different contrast. And that is, let's take now a look at the other 3 plagues: frogs, Svardeya, wild animals, which is Arov, and then the animal plague, which is Dever. Okay, by the... No, we're not going to talk about that today. Take a look at the different use of language. Here, the word chazak does not appear in reference to Paro's heart, but rather the word kaved. How would you translate kaved? Heavy. Very good. So there's a strengthening of the heart and a making heavy of the heart. Okay? So in the case of Tzfardeya, of the frogs, it says that Vayas Hashem Kidvar Moshe, that Moshe asked God to stay the plague after Paro relented. Vayamutu Hatzephardeim, and all of the Tzephardeim died. Vayitzperu otam chomorim chomorim, they were gathered in piles. Vayar Paro ki hayta harevacha, Paro sees that there's respite. Vehachbeid et libo, and his heart was heavy. Not chazak, but heavy. Kaved. So we have to try and understand, why is there a difference between the plague of blood and lice and boils, which is chazak, versus the Tzfardeya, which is kaved. Second example of kaved is by the Arov. Vayas Hashem Kidvar Moshe, Vayasar he'arov. Once, Moshe prayed to God for a respite from the wild animals. Okay, Lo nishar echad, all the wild animals disappeared. Vayachbeid Paro et libo, that Paro hardened his heart. Not hardened, sorry, made his heart heavy. Gam bapam hazot, this time as well, v'lo shilach etam. Okay. Finally, the third in the series is Dever, the animal plague. Okay, and this is where all of the livestock was dying. Vayomot kol miknei Mitzrayim u'miknei v'nei Solo meit echad. All of the livestock from Egypt died, but the livestock of the Jews, not one animal died. Vayishlach Paro v'hinei lo meit mimiknei Sol echad. After Paro noted this, that not one animal from Jews' barns died, Vayichbad leiv Paro v'lo shilach etam. Paro's heart became heavy, and he did not send the people away. We haven't yet defined the difference between hard and strong and heavy, but we will get there. The 7th plague of our parsha, which is the one of hail, is actually unique in that in this plague, it says both heavy and strong. Okay? Vayar Paro ki chadal hamatar v'habarad v'hakolot v'yosef lachato. Once Paro saw that the rain and the hail and the thundering was over, he compounded his sin. Vayachbeid libo hu va'avadav. He and his servant's heart became heavy. And then the very next verse is Vayechezak leiv Paro, that Paro's heart became strong. V'lo shilach et bnei Yisrael kasher diber Hashem b'yad Moshe, and he did not send the Jews away. Now, I'm going to read the other verses shortly. So what's the difference between chazak and kaved? So first, let's look at a traditional commentary from the Malbim, who starts us on the track. In Perek Dalet from last week's Parsha, where God describes how Paro's heart will be hardened, he says, Chozek halevu shelo yerach libo mipnei hamakot. To say that someone's heart becomes strong, chazak, is to imply that he will not melt, he will not become fearful and sort of capitulate because of the plagues. V'lif'amim chazak et libo ba'atzmo kamo betaninu vadam. There are some times when Paro was able to harden or strengthen his own heart on his own without any help from God, such as when Moshe threw the serpent down on the floor and it turned into the stick down to the floor and it turned into a serpent. And then Moshe's serpent swallowed up the other magician's serpents. And also the plague of blood. V'lifamim chizek Hashem et libo lispol hamaka. And there are other times when God strengthened Paro's heart, meaning Paro needed some divine help to get his heart strong enough to endure the plague, kemo bashchin u'va'arbe u'v'choshech, such as boils, locusts, and darkness, which we'll read about in next week's parsha. But then the Malbim says, v'hachbedet libo, what does it mean for a person's heart to be heavy? U'be'et shelo haya yachol lahachazik et levavo v'yarei mehamaka. That's describing a situation where a person can no longer strengthen his heart because he's so fearful of the plague that he just can't endure it any longer. Rak achar shera'a shehalcha hamaka ichbiret libo. But it's in the aftermath. The Malbim explains that whenever you find a heavy heart, it's in the aftermath of the plague. Chazak can be during the plague, I can endure that. But kaved is in the aftermath when I totally folded because of the pain of the plague, but now that it's gone, my heart becomes heavy, and I'm now going to completely disregard it. The chashav shelo yakeu odin, and he comes to the conclusion that it's not going to strike him anymore. So the Malbim's distinction between chazak and kaved is chazak when you're in the midst of the plague, and kaved is, no, I can't endure it. I finish it already. I'm scared and I don't want it anymore. But now that it's gone, kaved, my heart becomes heavy, and I'm not going. It's not going to happen anymore. It's done with, and that's how the Malbim describes kaved. Now, I'm going to suggest to you today a slightly different explanation, but I don't think that the Malbim is that far off. I think that there's a lot of validity in what he has to say. I want to posit for you, I want to submit to you that in certain ways, chazak and kaved are actually opposites of the other. What do I mean by that? Think about a muscle. When you say that your muscle is chazak, it's strong, it means that you're flexing your bicep, right? Try to think about flexing your bicep. Okay? So you've made it chazak, it's now hard and it's strong. Okay? Now think about a heavy muscle. What do you think about heaviness of a muscle? You think about a couch potato. Like when you sink into the couch because there's no muscle tension whatsoever in your body. Everything is flaccid and soft. That's kaved. That's you sink down. So in that respect, when you think about it in terms of a muscle, if your heart is a muscle, which is what our doctors tell us, the heart is a muscle. So a strong heart is where the muscle is tensed, and a heavy heart is where the muscle has gone soft. Now, what's the difference between the two? Chazak is when you consciously are fighting against what your senses tell you is harmful to you. And you resist it and you say, no, I'm going to fight against it. Kaved is where you completely give up. Now, why is that a contrast for Paro? So let me share with you something that I saw really interesting on a website that describes cognitive dissonance. Here's a nice, interesting chart. If you can look on your nice color chart, what is cognitive dissonance? When I notice a difference between action and belief, which means I notice that there is this long held belief that I've always had that, you know, the world loves Jews, for example. And then all of a sudden, and the world would recoil in horror if people were victims of terror. And then all of a sudden, I see people taking to the streets condemning Israel for being the victims. So I have this cognitive dissonance. And now in psychology, there's a whole system of ways of describing how do people resolve cognitive dissonance, because you cannot live with cognitive dissonance for any sustained period, because otherwise you go meshuggah. Okay, that's the idea, using the very technical term meshuggah. Okay, so your dissonance is up, and now you have three options in order to bring your dissonance down. You can change your belief, you can change your action, or you can change your action perception. So I'm going to put these into layman's terms and give you three examples of this. Let's say, for example, a person is a smoker. He's been a smoker all his life, and he finally realizes, because the Surgeon General, it's 1963, and the Surgeon General has just come out with the statement that smoking is hazardous for your health. Remember, up until 1963, there were ads in the paper that smoking will relax you, it's therapeutic, it's healthy, and then, because it calms your nerves. And all of a sudden, in 1963, the whole paradigm changes because people are getting cancer and dying from smoking. So how do you resolve the cognitive dissonance? So I'm going to change the order a little bit, okay? So you can change your action. That's one. For example, if someone is a smoker and then reads that smoking kills, they can quit smoking. So in our analogy, if we're going to compare that to Paro, that's option number one, Paro. You have always believed that you are the master of your own destiny. You are the reigning monarch. You are the ultimate god of Egypt. And so therefore, now all of a sudden you've been presented with this attack, this assault, not only on your country, but an assault on your very, very hard and very deeply felt convictions that you are the architect of your destiny. You have now cognitive dissonance, Paro. One of your options is let the people go. That's option number one. Paro does not view that as a viable option. So he has two other ways to resolve his cognitive dissonance. You can change your belief. That is, acquire new information that outweighs the dissonant belief. For example, if the smoker reads on social media that his friend's uncle was a chain smoker but lived to be 103, he may use that new information to convince himself that smoking isn't really bad for his health. So that's a change of belief. I just read that smoking kills, and everyone knows, and it's on the side of the pack of the cigarette that the Surgeon General has advised that smoking is bad for your health and it causes cancer and all of these terrible other things. Yeah, but, I also heard my friend told me that his uncle lived to a ripe old age. So I'll choose that belief instead. Okay, so that's another way to resolve cognitive dissonance. It may not be the best solution, but it's certainly a way to resolve cognitive dissonance. And in a certain way, that's chazak, because you're proactively basically saying, no, I'm going to combat the other belief, and I'm going to militate against it by saying smoking doesn't kill. Look at all the people who lived perfectly long and healthy lives and still smoked. So I'm taking a chazak position. I'm not going to accept that. I'm fighting against it. So even though the Nile, which is the source of my strength, has turned to blood, I'm going to militantly fight against it and say, no, it's just a fluke and something's going on here. It's a trick. I'm going to fight against it. And I still am in control of the Nile, despite the fact that it's turned to blood and we can't drink from it. Okay? But then there's another option. The other option is what's called change your action perception, the third option, which is reduce or block out the importance of one's previous values. For example, let's say a person knows that smoking kills, and he knows that all of the other information that people are telling him that smoking is not a problem, he really does believe that smoking kills. But he can become nihilistic, and he can say, what the heck? Living a long life isn't really worth it if you can't enjoy a good smoke. So his attitude is he's completely changed his action perception. Yeah, I know if I want to live to be 100, I should quit smoking. But I have two options now. I can either live to be 100 as a non-smoker, or I can live to be 70 as a smoker and really enjoy those 70 years smoking. So I'll change my values, I'll change my action perception, and I'll continue smoking. No. So I'll die at 70 instead of dying at 100. No, right? So that, in my opinion, is kaved. Because basically, instead of resisting and fighting against the belief and saying it's not true, you submit to it. You become soft, you become flaccid, you don't resist the knowledge. But what you do is you adapt to that new knowledge and say, it's really not as bad as people say. No, so what if I die from smoking? I'll have enjoyed my life up until that time. Right? And there have been people who have taken that position. So now here's where it really gets interesting. So first of all, you'd have to go back and look at each one of these plagues and determine why in some of them it's chazak and in some of them it's kaved. I would submit to you that when it came to blood, lice, and boils, Paro was able to fight against the conventional wisdom that this was an act of God. And he was able to say, no, you know what? I can explain this. This is a natural phenomenon, and it is happening as it's an unusual outburst, of some kind of temporary plague, but all societies undergo these kinds of things and will be fine. But with frogs, wild animals, and animal plague, I think it was Paro took a more attitude of resignation, which is sort of like, you know what? The frogs came and then they went, like the Malbim said he throws up his hands in despair. No, we lost what we lost. And if I have to live with this, I'll live with it. And I don't care anymore. I'm resigned to it. And the same thing could be true with the wild animals and the animal plague. If we have to live with it, we'll live with it. And if this is the way that the God of the Jews is going to deal with us, that's the way we'll figure out how to survive with all of these problems with the wilde chayas, with the animals. These are all having to do with animals, right? If the frogs are going to attack us, if the wild animals are attack us, if there's going to be plagues, we'll manage it. It's manageable. We'll figure out a way to deal with it. And maybe our society can move forward even without all of these animals or with the inconveniences. But with chazak, it's a direct opposition to the belief that this is an act of God. And in the other three, it's a resignation. In the hail, it's unique. The hail is, what does the Torah say? It was a mixture of ice and fire. And I think that that's the reason why you have both kaved and chazak here. Kaved is the ice. You sort of just resign yourself and you say, I don't care. I don't care. What difference does it make? We'll figure it out. And it's sort of like the despair of the nihilist who says, no, if that's the way it's got to be, that's the way it's got to be. And the fire inside the ice is the chazak. I'm going to fight against this. I'm on fire. And here was a lesson to Paro that human psychology can actually contain contradictions in order to try and satisfy its desires. So even though chazak and kaved are opposites of each other, but you want to know something, Paro? You really just don't want to let the Jews go. It just boils down to what you want, not what your intellect tells you. And so therefore you see that you're basically using two opposite arguments. On the one hand, you're chazak, you're denying that this is from God. On the other hand, you're kaved, and you're resigning yourself to whatever God says. If it happens, we'll live with it. Okay? And even though those are contradictory feelings, one is hardening and making your heart strong and going and being oppositional and trying to come up with another explanation. And the other one is acceptance and resignation. But you know what? You're a bundle of contradictions. And that's why this is described in the Torah as Ani sholech et kol magefotai el libecha. I'm going to send all of my plagues against you to show you that you can't reconcile, even with your cognitive dissonance. There's no rationality to the way you're trying to reconcile what's going on about you, because you're using both what I guess they would call a change of belief and a change of action perception. And finally, take a look at this idea. Okay, the Torah makes a point of saying that the hail affected the agriculture in one of two ways, and this is very bizarre. And this is where I have it bolded here for you in chapter Tes, in chapter 9, Psukim Lamed Aleph and Lamed Bet. It says, V'hapishta v'haseora nukata. It says the flax and the barley were afflicted. Ki haseora aviv v'hapishta giv'ol. It's a little bit hard to translate, so we'll rely on Rashi, because the barley was already aviv. What does aviv mean? It's the Rashi says, Kevar bikira ve'omedet bikasheha. He says barley has a tendency to ripen. It's the first grain harvest of the season, whereas wheat tends to ripen and be ready for harvest around June. Barley becomes ripe in already April, May, okay, because barley ripens faster than wheat. And the same thing is true with flaxseed. The flax plants become hard. And so when hail strikes a fully ripened stalk, it destroys the stalk because the stalk is already hard and it cracks and it breaks. But then the Torah says, "V'hachita v'hakusemet lo nuku," but the wheat and the spelt had not yet been afflicted. Ki afilot heina. And as Rashi says, the word afila means me'ucharot, va'adayin hayu rakot. Those harvests, those types of grain ripen faster. So the stalks were still soft. V'yacholot la'amod bifnei kasher. And therefore the stalks were not completely destroyed. They were just bent over because they could endure being hit by hail because they were still soft. Now, the question you might ask yourself is, why is this detailed information necessary? Why in the world would the Torah spend a full two psukim telling me that when it came to the more ripened stalks, those were completely destroyed? But when it came to the wheat and the spelt, those were not so completely destroyed because they were still soft and they could bend over and endure the hail. What's the point? Why is the Torah making a point of saying this? Like, what does it teach us? What lesson is being imparted here? My feeling is that it's the same feeling as the fire and ice. It's the same point of chazak and kaved. That Paro, in this plague, you're both chazak, like the barley stalk, but you're also soft, like you've just sort of given up and just bent over to take the punishment, like the wheat stalk. And that's why the Torah is combining the two ideas. You, Paro, are both chazak right? Flex the muscle oppositional, going militating against this plague with everything you got. And that's like the wheat stalk, which is hard and then it breaks under the hail. But then you've also gone soft and just said, who the heck cares? I'm totally resigned to this. Okay. And that's the wheat stalk. Okay, because it's not yet ripened. So the point of this exercise is to remind us that Paro is a paradigm for all of us. I would submit to you that especially in the times in which we're living, we have to come up with some cure for our own cognitive dissonance. We thought that the world really cared about Jews, and many people in the world still do care about Jews. Let's not completely discount all of Western civilization. But there's no question that that we've seen from certain segments of society things that we hoped we would never see ever again. Which, just like the rise of rabid anti-Semitism in pre-war Germany and in pre-war Europe, we couldn't, there was tremendous cognitive dissonance. I, a German Jew, should be subject to this. What have I done? I fought in World War I. I was I was loyal to Kaiser Wilhelm, and I did everything that I was supposed to do as a loyal subject of the German Empire. Why would I be subject to any kind of persecution? And a lot of Jews had such cognitive dissonance that they were paralyzed and could not act. And then we know the tragic aftermath of that. When we see things happening again, not to suggest that it's the same thing that happened in pre-war Germany, but there are certain things that are certainly similar to what was going on in pre-war Germany. We see that happening in our society, where a country like Canada could vote in the United Nations to support a ceasefire and still give lip service to the Jewish population. We support Israel, and then at the same time vote for a ceasefire. I don't know. Maybe the prime minister is suffering from cognitive dissonance himself, but there's certainly some inconsistency there, right? And how do you resolve it? So you could resolve it by changing action, just basically saying, I'm out of here. It's time to make Aliyah. You could change your belief, and you could say, as soon as we get a conservative government into power, things will get better. It's not as bad as people think it is, etc. That's one way of dealing with the cognitive dissonance. And the third way is to say, to be kaved. No, that's the way it is. That's the way we've been suffering as Jews for centuries, and we have to accept it, and there's no choice. And we will always be, that's just have to be kaved, just accept it, just take it. And I would suggest that that just like as in Paro's case, when God's sending you a message that results in cognitive dissonance, you have to be a person of action. We have to learn how to be people of action as well. And that's what I will leave you with for today. Questions or comments? No. Yes, Rachel.
The way I was raised in every year, learn history, like you reference what went on in Germany. I never expected anything less.
So Rachel is basically saying she's been prepared for this her whole life because.
But seeing it.
Yeah. You grew up. Yeah.
Zionism is racism, and over and over and over again, I've seen the world turn against Israel and Jews.
The world has consistently, right? In other words, we shouldn't be shocked by what we're seeing today. Because b'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalotenu. I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying, but I also think that it's risen to a whole new level. Like after the day after October 7th, didn't you think that it would be just universal revulsion from what had happened? And there wasn't. There was condemnation in many circles, but not in all circles. Remember that video of the Congresswoman, was it Rashida Tlaib, where the reporter went after her and said, look at what happened on October 7th, the beheadings and the rapes and the torture and the murder. She wouldn't respond. She just walked right past the reporter.
Yeah, yeah.
It was really, really, really quite shocking. I think that changed paradigms for some people. I'm not sure. Like, we all knew the Choldor Vador Omdim Aleinu L'Chalotenu. We all knew what had happened in the Holocaust, but there was always a part of us that said it could never happen here. And I think that for some people, that no.
Also felt totally comfortable, and Germany was their fatherland, and they sacrificed their lives for it, and they were in the highest echelon. And I remember Menachem Begin said, with Sabra and Shatila, he said, Goyim killed Goyim, and they blamed Jews. Like, I can just remember so many examples of the world turning against the Jews, even when we're completely innocent. I don't know, this is just like what I've grown up with, so I'm not surprised.
Okay. Okay.
Me neither.
Yes.
I'm not surprised.
Wasn't against that. And that wasn't specifically targeted against Jews. So it's really not that surprising that Jews,
Yeah.
were not.
Yeah, so after 9/11, there was also not universal condemnation. There was some support in the world. Many people celebrated. Palestinians celebrated in the streets after 9/11. So what do you expect? Okay, one last thing, and then we'll call it a day. Any ideas how to convince those in denial? Well,
Yeah.
if you're in a
That's
state,
a good
if you're in a
question.
state of denial,
Yeah.
well, we're reading about denial now in the Parsha. Denial is the river in Egypt. So it's a reason why denial and denial are the same words.
Yeah, that's a
Paro was
good
also
one.
in a state of denial, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, well, I think all you can do is just point out the inconsistency of thinking. But I think that this is a helpful exercise. Are you chazak or are you kaved? That's really just the point I wanted to get across. I have to go, I'm sorry, so we're going to call it here for today. And we'll take a break for a couple of weeks, and we'll be back at the end of January. Last Tuesday in January, I think it's the 29th or something like that. Hope to see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.